What if everything you thought you knew about the Brown family was wrong, and the real betrayal was hiding in plain sight? This story will completely change how you see it all. And if you want more shocking breakdowns like this, hit subscribe right now because you do not want to miss what is coming next. When people look back at the unraveling of the Brown family, they often focus on the obvious moments, the arguments, the visible favoritism, the emotional distance that played out on screen. But the real beginning of the end was far more subtle and far more unsettling, because it did not arrive with a dramatic explosion, it arrived quietly, hidden beneath a moment that at the time seemed logical, controlled, and even necessary. And that moment centered around a shift in loyalty that no one truly questioned until it was far too late. For years, Janelle had positioned herself as the calm, rational voice within the family. She was the one who claimed independence, the one who said she did not need romance, validation, or even legal recognition to feel secure in her place within the structure of plural marriage. She built an identity around logic, around attachment, around being above the emotional conflicts that often surfaced between the other wives. And because of that identity, she became the one everyone trusted, the one whose words carried weight, not just inside the family, but with the audience watching from the outside. So when the most controversial decision in the family's history began to unfold, the legal divorce from Mary and the legal marriage to Robin, something unexpected happened. Instead of remaining neutral or quietly supportive, Janelle stepped forward and became the strongest defender of the decision. She spoke with certainty, she dismissed the concerns that were clearly visible in the room, and she framed the entire situation as something that would not fundamentally change the family dynamic. And in that moment, a quiet but powerful shift took place, because her voice did not just support the decision, it validated it in a way that no one else could have achieved. And what made this even more complex was the contrast between her past statements and her current stance. For years, she had openly minimized the importance of legal marriage, calling it nothing more than a piece of paper, something that held no real power within the emotional and spiritual structure of their family. Yet now, she was defending a move that clearly elevated one wife into a position of legal authority over the others. And instead of acknowledging that contradiction, she leaned into her role as the logical spokesperson, presenting the change as harmless, as necessary, and even as beneficial for the family's future. And this is where the deeper tension begins to emerge, because when logic is used to override emotion without addressing it, the result is not resolution, but suppression. And that suppression does not disappear. It builds slowly beneath the surface, waiting for a moment when it can no longer be ignored. And within the Brown family, emotional. And within that distance, the cracks that had formed earlier began to widen. Communication became strained, misunderstandings became more frequent, and the sense of unity that had once defined the family started to fade. And yet, even as these changes became more apparent, the underlying issues were not fully addressed. Instead, they were often reframed, minimized, or redirected in an effort to maintain the appearance of cohesion. But appearances can only hold for so long, especially when the reality beneath them continues to shift. And when the global pandemic introduced a new set of pressures, the fragile balance that had been maintained finally began to collapse. The restrictions, the rules, and the expectations placed on each household created a situation where existing tensions were amplified, and choices that might have once been negotiable became absolute. And for Janelle, this period marked a significant turning point because it forced her to confront a reality that could no longer be explained away through logic alone. The request that she distance herself from her children in order to maintain alignment with Cody was not just a logistical issue, it was a deeply personal one that challenged her priorities in a way that previous situations had not. And in that moment, the identity she had built for herself as the rational, independent wife was no longer enough to guide her decision because the stakes were different, the impact was immediate, and the consequences were clear. And it was here that a shift began to take place, one that contrasted sharply with her earlier stance. Instead of defending the system, she began to question it. Instead of prioritizing the collective image, she began to focus on her own boundaries. And in doing so, she opened the door to a different path, one that acknowledged the complexity of her situation rather than simplifying it into a narrative that no longer fit. And this shift did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of accumulated experiences, moments where logic had been used to navigate difficult situations but had not fully addressed the emotional realities beneath them. And as those realities came to the surface, they brought with them a new understanding, one that required honesty, reflection, and the willingness to make different choices, even when those choices came with uncertainty. And as this new chapter began as the consequences of those earlier decisions continued to unfold, the deeper reality of the situation became impossible to ignore, because what once appeared to be a stable and carefully balanced family structure was now revealing itself to be something far more fragile and uneven. The shift that began during the legal marriage transition did not remain isolated to that moment. It slowly expanded into every corner of the family's life, influencing how decisions were made, how resources were distributed, and how relationships were maintained over time. The move to Flagstaff became one of the clearest examples of how these underlying dynamics had evolved, because it introduced a new level of complexity that the family was not fully prepared to handle, financially, emotionally, and logistically. The relocation required a significant investment of trust, cooperation, and long-term planning, yet the foundation needed to support those efforts had already been weakened by years of unaddressed tension and misaligned priorities. And while the move was presented as an exciting new chapter, it quickly became a source of stress and division. The shared vision that was supposed to unite the family began to fracture as individual needs and expectations came into conflict. And within that environment, Janelle once again found herself navigating a difficult position because her earlier role as the logical supporter of major decisions had created an expectation that she would continue to align herself with the direction being set by Cody. However, the reality of living in Flagstaff exposed challenges that could not simply be rationalized away. The financial strain of maintaining multiple households, the uncertainty surrounding property development, and the increasing distance between family members all contributed to a growing sense of instability. And for Janelle, this instability was not just theoretical, it was something she experienced directly as she attempted to maintain her independence while also contributing to a collective system that was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. The situation reached a particularly symbolic point during her time living on the property in an RV, where the contrast between the family's original vision and the current reality became impossible to overlook. What was once imagined as a step toward unity and shared growth now appeared as a fragmented arrangement where resources and comfort were not evenly distributed. And this contrast raised important questions about the long-term viability of the structure they had built, because it highlighted the gap between intention and outcome, a gap that had been widening for years but had not been fully acknowledged until circumstances made it undeniable. And as these realizations began to take shape, they brought with them a sense of urgency that had not been present before, because the cost of maintaining the existing system was no longer just emotional, it was also practical and financial. And this shift in perspective played a crucial role in Janelle's evolving understanding of her situation, because it forced her to reassess the assumptions she had relied on for so long, including the belief that her independence would protect her from the imbalances within the family dynamic. The truth that emerged was far more complicated, because independence within a shared system does not eliminate vulnerability, especially when that system is structured in a way that concentrates power and decision-making in specific areas. And as Janelle began to confront this reality, she also had to navigate the emotional impact of recognizing that some of the choices she had supported in the past had contributed to the challenges she was now facing. Boundaries. This decision marked a departure from the pattern she had followed in earlier years, because it demonstrated a readiness to prioritize her own perspective, even when it meant challenging the established dynamic. And the impact of this shift was immediate because it disrupted